Good afternoon. Like Jenny said, thank you so much for joining us today for Faith and Social Responsibility, the PCUSA at Work in Human Rights and Environmental Issues. I am Jessica Modlin. I'm the Associate for Enough for Everyone with the Presbyterian Hunger Program. Many of you are familiar with the work of the Presbyterian Hunger Program and our focus and how we focus our responsibility as people of faith to respond to environmental and human rights injustices. But we don't do that work in isolation. We do it through partnerships with people out across the U.S. and internationally, and we also do that in coordination with other ministry offices within the PCUSA. On today's webinar, we're so pleased to have joining us two of our colleagues from the Compassion, Peace, and Justice Ministry area, Bill Simplotsky-Jarman and Rob Four, who serve as staff to the Presbyterian Church USA's Committee on Mission Responsibility Through Investment, or MRTI. In recognition of the Church's unique opportunity to advance its mission faithfully and creatively through the financial resources entrusted to it, MRTI implements the General Assembly's policy on socially responsible investing by engaging corporations in which the Church owns stock. The Committee on MRTI is comprised of 12 members, which include 2 representatives from each of the boards of the Board of Pensions, the Presbyterian Foundation, and Presbyterian Mission Agency, 1 representative from 3 advocacy advisory committees, including the Advocacy Committee on Racial and Ethnic Concerns, the Advocacy Committee on Women's Concerns, the Advisory Committee on Social Witness Policy, and 3 at-large members elected by the General Assembly. MRTI is in its 45th year of existence, leading the PCUSA's efforts in faith-based investing and corporate engagement. Welcome, Bill and Rob.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Okay, can you see here? I want to make sure you can see my screen. Okay. Okay. Let's see. All right. I hope everybody can see that, and that should be the right view there. Thank you, Jessica and Jenny, for having us on this webinar and giving us this opportunity to connect a little more broadly outside of our immediate group. So we would like to take you through a little bit of the history first of how this all came to be with the Presbyterian Church doing social responsible investing. The Presbyterian Church was actually in kind of on the ground floor of what has become known as social responsible investing movement. Starting off in which really got started in the kind of the late 60s and early 70s, and the first GA policy is on the screen there, with when the church started thinking about its invested capital. And when we say invested capital, we talk mostly about the money that is invested with the Board of Pensions that funds the pension fund for church workers in the PCUSA, as well as the money that is invested in the Presbyterian Foundation, which funds mission and other kind of missional efforts of the Presbyterian Church. As of at any given time, the markets can be up or down, but generally we say those two funds combined are around $10 billion worth of invested capital in the markets. So in the early 70s, the church adopted, and we've excerpted a couple take a couple excerpts of the policy about the idea that our invested capital could do more than just needed to do more than just produce a financial return. So the first one you can see here, and this is the idea that our investments are an instrument of mission and include theological, social, and economic considerations. A few years later, there was another policy, and here's kind of an excerpt of the thrust of what that policy was trying to get at, and it was the idea that our dollars invested in the market needed to do more than just do no harm. In fact, we wanted to, the Presbyterians wanted their dollars to accomplish certain mission goals and advance those that the church has discerned. We kind of say, in broadly speaking, the chief goal of the Committee on Mission Responsibility through Investment is to impact the quote-unquote double bottom line. So in kind of the strictest sense, the purpose of many businesses and many kind of investment endeavors is to maximize one's financial return, which is very important. But for us, in the faith-based investing community, in the social response, in the kind of the so-called values investing community, values-based investing community, we seek to really impact the double bottom line. So to maximize the financial return, which is of course fulfilling our fiduciary duties, as well as to maximize social benefit. Both those things are equally important, and we try to advance our strategy to achieve both portions of that goal. So specifically, the General Assembly mission goals have evolved over the years, but the first ones basically were the pursuit of peacemaking, advancing racial justice, advancing social and economic justice, advancing environmental stewardship, and later came advancing women's rights and protecting human rights as well. So those, broadly speaking, are the goals that all of our engagements are trying to advance. Now, a little bit more about what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about faith-based investing. And we say there are basically three pillars of faith-based investing. The first is portfolio screening, which includes prescription and/or divestment, which is basically about mostly about negative behavior of a company. I'll talk more about that in a little bit here. Second is the flip side of that is proactive or alternative investing, which focuses more on positive behaviors of companies. And third is shareholder engagement of corporations, and this is something that I want to spend a little more time talking about because this is a lot of what we do through MRTI is doing shareholder engagement with corporations. So going back to fleshing these out a little bit more about the portfolio screening. So the PCUSA has over the years adopted policies. Well, there are only I believe two or three categorical, we've only divested categorically from a few industries. Tobacco is one of them. We have a policy that says we do not invest with tobacco companies. And though there's never been a church-wide policy on not investing in alcohol or gaming stocks, both the Board of Pensions and the Foundation have internal policies that kind of keep the alcohol companies and gaming companies out of our portfolio. The church has chosen to divest from military-related companies, and the actual policy is any company that is 50% or more of their revenues come from military-related kind of pursuits we don't invest with. And third, we also have we've divested at various times about on human rights abuses, starting first in South Africa in the 70s and 80s, and later Sudan, and most recently Israel and Palestine. At our last General Assembly in 2014, General Assembly voted to divest from Caterpillar, Motorola Solutions, and Hewlett-Packard because of their non-peaceful pursuits in Israel and Palestine. There's actually a fourth, I believe it was a fourth categorical divestment which the Assembly has chosen to, another industry that the Assembly has chosen to divest, which is for-profit prisons, and that happened at the 2014 Assembly as well. So all in all, our committee puts together a proscription screening list or divestment list that we produce every year that includes that includes all the companies that are not in compliance with the various policies the church has taken. And in 2015, the list gets developed and kind of later in the year, so we say it's our 2015-2016 list. That includes 50 companies. So there are 50 companies that are not on that are on our prescription list for this period of time. And the reason it changes a little bit because the companies that that may have 50 or around 50% of the revenues come from military-related production or efforts, that can kind of fluctuate. It may go below 50%, may go above, and so the list does change a little bit. And obviously, after every assembly, the list can also change depending on the actions that the General Assembly takes. So all in all, 50 companies in this year. The rest, every other company, the managers of the Board of Pensions, the fund managers of the Board of Pensions, and the foundation are free to invest with. So that's kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about our investments in which companies. So unless they're on the prescription list, our managers are free, or the managers of the Board of Pensions and the foundation are free to invest in those companies. Second, again, we talked about the second pillar is the proactive or alternative investments. You'll see here a policy that 10% of the General Assembly's unrestricted assets are eligible for investment in community economic development. So these types of investments are, we use the OICO credit as an example here, and I believe the foundation does have a small percentage of its funds invested with OICO credit, as well as some other companies that are their purpose of their company is to address some social issue. So these could kind of be, and the whole idea about positive investments or alternative investments is that they may generate a lower return. However, but it is acceptable for a lower return because for a lower return if a small percentage of the fund or the portfolio is invested with these companies because we want to support what they're doing. Having said that, there have been some quarters, especially when the market is down, where these alternative investments actually outperform the rest of the market. So it's not completely a financial risk all the time, or an increased financial risk all the time. Third pillar again is shareholder engagement. And as part owners of a company, shareholders can engage companies to encourage policies and practices more in line with their values and ethics that address pressing issues in society. So again, this is where a lot of our work of MRTI is kind of done, is through shareholder engagement. And the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, is the agency, the governmental agency that regulates the the markets and invested capital in this country. According to SEC rules, a shareholder just needs to own $2,000 worth of stock for 1 year, and the value, it needs to be enough shares to have the value be $2,000 worth of stock for 1 year. And if those two things are met, any shareholder can file a shareholder resolution, or sometimes called a shareholder proposal. So I'll talk more about that in a minute, but I'll talk a little bit more what shareholder engagement looks like. Sometimes we call this becoming an active owner. So again, many people who have both institutions and individuals who have investments with a certain fund manager aren't necessarily active owners, and we'll talk a little more about how that can happen. So proxy voting. So a proxy is basically a ballot that the company produces every year for their annual meeting, and includes shareholder resolutions. Some are generated by the company that have to do with executive pay or electing board members, and others are generated from other shareholders. Correspondence, that's kind of the first step of shareholder engagement. So when we are looking to engage with a company, the first thing we do is we correspond with, we send a letter to their CEO or their investor relations office to say that, say who we are, we're long-term investors, and we are interested in a particular issue. That may lead to a dialogue or meetings with management, and it often does. And if those dialogues are productive and the company is moving in a direction that the committee feels is positive, then there may or may not ever be a shareholder resolution. Now, sometimes that doesn't always happen, and so we decide in Congress with our other partners, and I'll talk about who those are in a minute, we may file a shareholder resolution, which again is a proposal. And we may go around and solicit support of other shareholders with whom we're in partnership to co-file with us, so we have a little more of a collective impact. The shareholder engagement could look like participating in public appeals or campaigns, and it could end in proscription or divestment. So one of the things that we all stress on our committee is that that last bullet point there, prescription or divestment, is an important tool to have in the kind of the shareholder engagement toolkit, but it is the absolute last tool. It is when all these other tools have been exhausted and there seems to be no other way forward, where we will recommend divestment in certain cases. Talking a little more about partnerships. Okay, with whom do we work? Much of our work is augmented through partnerships with the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, which is an organization that the PCUSA was actually a founding member of back in the early 1970s. And this brings together Roman Catholic orders, pretty much all the mainline denominations, kind of their pension funds and foundations, several Jewish groups, a few Muslim groups, and this organization is actually headquartered in New York City in 475 Riverside Drive, which was the headquarters of the Presbyterian Church, the United Presbyterian Church, UP, the Northern Stream of the Presbyterian Church. I'm forgetting the acronym right now, but. So a lot of what we do is organized through this group, and they have about, together with all the organizations they have represented, they have about $100 billion in assets under management. So we do a lot of our work, our strategy in concert with what's going on there. Also, an organization called Ceres. Let me pull these up here. Ceres, which is a coalition that mobilizes businesses and kind of NGOs and religious groups to work towards a economic responsibility and ecological sustainability. So they focus a lot on environmental issues, and a lot of our environmental focus, a lot of our environmental responsibility work gets organized through Ceres. And the Presbyterian Church USA is a member of that organization, was an early member, and we just really a fantastic group. They have organized recently, I think it's over $24 trillion in assets around kind of really pushing policymakers and others towards a clean power plan. Also, we work ecumenically with the World Council of Churches, and for especially in different areas of human rights, but also other issues as well. So to talk more specifically about some of the highlights of our work over the years, I will invite my colleague Bill Skoploski-Jarman, who is in his 32nd year, finishing his 32nd year of service to MRTI, and is a compendium of information about the history and importantly the highlights of our work. Bill, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you for spending some time with us this afternoon. We'll try to get through this quickly, but I have one slide for each of the 32 years, so we're going to be here for a while. That's not really accurate. We'll cram that down into a more reasonable time. Wanted to just say a word about the work of MRTI, meaning how does MRTI decide what it's going to work on, what companies it's going to engage, what is the scope of the endeavors for a particular year. And essentially, MRTI gets referrals from the General Assembly on a variety of subjects. We'll talk some about that in a few minutes. It also, as Rob pointed out, works in collaboration with many other faith-based and value-based investors working on joint projects. It also, because we are a representative body, can have stuff brought to us by the Advisory Committee on Women's Concerns or the Advisory Committee, Advocacy Committee on Racial Ethnic Concerns, or AC-SWAP, or the Foundation or Board of Pensions, whatever. So issues can be worked on in response to what member organizations, member committees bring to the table. And finally, we do at times get inquiries of wanting assistance from presbyteries and synods and even individual congregations that lead us to try to see if there's any way we can help through the responsible use of our role as investors in that. So all of that goes to the committee, and the committee is responsible for developing a work plan to guide its work and the work of the staff in meeting all of these expectations and directives in some cases. A couple of highlights is that you should know is that MRTI doesn't simply work on the issue du jour. Basically, we have a well-rounded, broad program in several areas, so I wanted to just highlight a couple of areas that may not be getting as much awareness. The whole issue of financial institutions and banking institutions, you'll see on a slide there. This goes back since the inception of MRTI, when a lot of its work was doing work with banks on about bank lending to South Africa in the 70s and 80s until the fall of apartheid. And awareness of the role of predatory lending, redlining, and other kinds of practices that closed out access to investment capital for literally millions of people who couldn't get mortgages or small business loans or insurance or what have you. With the rise of subprime lending and bundling of mortgages into investment vehicles that precipitated the huge collapse about 10 years ago, or a little less than 10 years ago, MRTI was shifted, focused heavily with the big banks on predatory lending, then on foreclosure avoidance, mortgage servicing, and has basically then been looking at emerging issues such as subprime auto loans, shadow banking, which are buying up foreclosed properties, then renting them out, bundling that rent into another investment vehicle, which poses the kind of risks that mortgage lending did before. So we do spend a lot of work on that. But, we have other things we work on, and let me talk about a couple of them. Obviously, the whole issue of protecting the environment, caring for God's creation, has been a strong point of MRTI over many, many years. In particular, in the late 1980s and 1990s, more work was done on this as the church began partnering with affected communities where there were placing hazardous factories, etc., in largely areas for communities of color and low to moderate income people who didn't have political clout to be able to defend themselves against these encroachments. We did a lot of work in meeting with refineries and in the Bay Area, the Houston area, etc., with a number of coalitions working on trying to protect those local communities. And on safety and health for the workers, we were probably, I think, about the only religious group to ever testify in federal hearings on material safety standards, particularly in the oil and chemical business. That also was a time period where you had the Exxon Valdez oil spill, which prompted a great increase in focus on environmental responsibility, and led a few organizations to issue what were called the Valdez Principles. The Valdez Principles were spawned by the Ceres Coalition and called on every company to have a comprehensive policy on environmental matters and to report transparently on their performance in these areas. Over the years, those principles were changed to be called the Ceres Principles, and now literally dozens of companies have created principles along that line. Ceres also created the Global Reporting Initiative, which tried to catalog and standardize reporting on environmental performance, social performance now, and some governance issues. And literally thousands of companies around the world report using the GRI guidelines that were spawned by our coalitional work during that time period. And in 2002 and 2003, in that time period there, Ceres also launched the whole concept of climate risk. And prior to that, there was an awareness of climate change. Presbyterian Church itself, since 1990, has had policy-driven work addressing climate change. But climate risk, which was a call for every company, no matter what industry they were in, to assess the impact of climate change upon their current and future business models and act accordingly to lower that risk. Now, as more and more stuff was happening in this area, I think you can see by one of the slides kind of the logos of many of the companies that we have interfaced with in all of these years. Let me just give you a couple of highlights here. Our work basically had focused with them on getting commitments by companies to increase their use of renewable energy or energy efficiency measures that would lower their carbon footprint, as well as reducing their own emissions in their operations. And we were, after 8 years of working, filing resolutions and pressuring ConocoPhillips, finally got them to agree to adopt a reduction goal for their emissions. We've also worked with a number of the utilities calling for analysis and reporting on their air emissions, which has helped move that industry forward. And we've been supportive of the effort to embrace sustainability across a broad spectrum of engagements, as well as incorporate social and governance criteria into evaluating companies. More recently, with the referral from the 2014 General Assembly, we have stepped up our engagement along with others of fossil fuel companies, but not solely fossil fuel companies, because we've been successful collectively in getting a number of the consumers of electricity and power from fossil fuel companies to set goals to become carbon neutral by a certain point, to increase their use of renewable energy, etc. But in the area of fossil fuel, this year we've co-filed with others, resolution with ExxonMobil and Chevron. The ExxonMobil meeting is coming up toward the end of the month. Interestingly, this is the first year that ExxonMobil has not replaced its reserves that it has. In other words, it has pumped more out of the ground and not replaced that capacity for the very first time in the company's history, which is a move away from, in a sense, leaving it in the ground, because they're not going to bring online as much oil and gas. They also recently purchased a, I think it was solar power company, so they're beginning to look into investing and becoming more of an energy company simply than oil and gas. Recently at the Ceres conference, Rob and Joseph Kennard from the Board of Pensions is on MRTI. We're able to join others to meet with General Motors to talk over fuel economy standards, electric vehicles, and a number of other things that they're working on. Noble Energy, our resolution got a quarter of the shareholder vote this year about carbon asset risk to the company if as climate change calls for increased shifting immediately as possible toward a low carbon future. We've also had dialogues with Phillips 66 that have led to laying out a whole series of meetings coming up over the coming year about that, and engage others like Marathon Petroleum, etc. We've also continued to monitor companies we've worked with before. CF Industries, where we had 67% of the shareholder vote calling for them to report on their environmental work, has issued 2 or 3 reports, and we've been monitoring that and engaging the company, trying to make the reports more robust. Let me say that we will be bringing to the GA in this July, or June rather, a report on the work that has been done by MRTI in light of the referral of an overture from the previous assembly, which called for the categorical divestment of the 200 largest oil, gas, coal companies in the world. And our recommendation is working on twofold. First of all, we're actually asking all companies to step up to the plate and become more responsible in their work, not just simply the supply side of the equation, but also the demand side. So as the demand for renewables and climate-friendly energy policy, products will increase, the supply is going to increase as well, and the supply of fossil fuels will continue to dwindle. The other thing we've done is we've staked out a whole series of criteria which will make clear our expectations of all these companies and provide the committee with the means to be able to bring future recommendations to the Assembly for possible divestment based on objective standards and a evaluation of the companies according to them. The GA has no official policy that's been adopted up till now about all the what energy sources are permissible or which ones aren't, and this will help us be able to bring recommendations that will stand the test of time and the light of day, so to speak, when we evaluate these companies. We've also moved forward to encourage everyone to participate in the Clean Trillion Plan that's to eventually past 2030 to get $1 trillion a year invested in climate-friendly technologies. We are far from that now, but the International Energy Commission estimates that we will need at least $1 trillion of such investments in order to keep warming to 2 degrees and even lower moving into the future. And we've been able to mobilize significant interest in this. There are a number of major banks in the United States have announced huge targets of $100 billion or whatever to reach this. A number of other companies are pledging to get involved. There's been a lot of work of trying to create investment vehicles so that smaller investors can also invest in it as well. And we've been moving steadily on the public policy front so that the Paris Agreement from last December, which sets us on a path to converting our energy system from fossil fuels to renewables was supported by dozens of, not hundreds of companies, as well as the ones that have come out in favor of the Clean Power Act here in the United States against a lot of opposition. So that's it on the environmental side. Now let me just address a couple of things. I'm sorry to keep going on here, but about the trafficking side. Let me just simply say, here we are. We have highlights of MRTI's work in protecting and respecting human rights. Essentially, what the current kind of policy called the Ruggie Principles, which were developed by the United Nations, calls upon governments to protect human rights, it calls upon corporations to promote human rights, and it calls upon everyone to ensure that there are mechanisms for the redress of grievances when human rights are violated. And we have been working in this whole area since the inception of MRTI back during the South Africa days, 1971, 72, moving forward. Over the years, MRTI has accomplished a number of things with this work. We have focused on the whole concept of forced labor, particularly in places like Burma, where basically people are compelled, it's virtual slavery, to trafficked labor, where what we've been advocating, for example, recently, is a policy for companies to not employ people who have been required to pay fees in order to get the jobs. We found, for example, literally hundreds of Filipinos were brought into Israel to harvest crops in the occupied territories in the Jordan Valley. And on average, in order to get that job, they've had to pay $4,500 to a labor broker. Then they begin working, and they are cheated out of their wages, whatever, and never really get out of that debt. It's hard for them to pay it off. Or situations where people are brought to Jordan, for example, from Bangladesh, and immediately have their passports taken away, and they have absolutely no recourse, no protection, and can be deported at any moment, can't even circulate around the country. The inability to gain protections that comes with this type of human rights violation is very important. We were responsible for working with Time Warner, which is the parent company of Warner Brothers, and beefing up their ethical standards for sourcing their products. And that's to make sure that Tweety Bird is not made by children in some country, and have been very proud of that work over time. Also worked with many other toy companies, Mattel, Hasbro, Disney, as well as clothing companies, TJ Maxx, Warnaco, etc., to make sure that child labor is ended according to the International Labor Organization standards, and that conditions like forced overtime, exposure to health hazards and safety hazards, low wages, and no ability to organize, or protections from being placed on a banned list if you become labeled a troublemaker, so that you can't get a job anywhere else. In the other area, the travel and tourism industry, we worked very hard with ECPAT USA, and collectively we're involved in getting Hilton hotels on the pathway of training all their employees and supporting anti-trafficking, particularly sex trafficking work. Choice Hotels joined Delta, you have there. We were involved in getting United into the fold. We're having to keep a little heat on them because they have been lagging in the training area of their employees up till now. And finally, just to say, there's one area which was kind of intriguing and interesting that we've been working at. We met with Old Dominion this year, one trucking company. Others met with other trucking companies, because we have found that truckers in their travels across the country, going in and out of truck stops, etc., have in the past and been able to cite incidents of trafficking going on, and through proper training and knowing who to contact, who to call, and all that type of thing, have been able to have interventions that have actually saved people out of being in this trafficking chain. And so now we're working to promote awareness of Truckers Against Trafficking, which is trying to get the whole industry up and running and aware of the role they can play in this area. So there's just a few highlights of our work. Very proud of it, and how its breadth continues to grow, and respect for our work continues to grow. And looking forward, I won't say I'm looking forward to the next 32 years, but close to it. Okay. So turn it back to Rob here to finish up.
Thanks a lot, Bill. I appreciate that. That was very, very comprehensive, and it's just that was just touching. I know, scratching the surface of the work that the committee has done, and how the church has been engaged in all these variety of issues over the last 45 years with corporations. Okay, so I think now we're going to move over a little bit to the kind of the final portion of our time together, which is trying to equip you all with some ways to connect with some of our work. And also offer some question and response time. If you have specific questions, we'll do our best to respond to them. First and foremost, a very quick way that you could connect with our work almost immediately is if you, or if your congregation or any kind of institution has any kind of invested capital and do not have a kind of a socially responsible investment policy. A place to start could be looking at our 2016 prescription/divestment list. Also, we could help you develop a policy based on we've over the years have collected a number of different congregations, kind of the ways that they go about discerning what's right for them, and we would be happy to help you do that. The second way is to engage in active ownership of either your personal or your congregation's investments through implementing the 2016 proxy voting recommendations, which every year MRTI goes through all of the proxy the issues, the resolutions that are organized by the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility community, and determine which is the best way. We recommend that both the Board of Pensions and the Foundation vote, but then also make that available to the rest of the PCUSA congregations and individuals to vote when it's time during the annual general meetings of these corporations. So that's a couple things that we can do. That you could do immediately, and at the end I'll tell you a little more how you can get that. But right now I think we want to move to some question and response time, and I think Jessica is tracking the questions.
Yeah, and I wanted to say too about the two lists that Rob has mentioned. We will be sending a follow-up email to all the folks that are registered, and we can share those with you so that you will have them along with a link to this presentation. The two questions that we have that came up is, there was a question about you used the term prescription and divestment, and they were wondering if there is, could you say a little bit about the difference between those two things, or are they the same thing?
Prescription and divestment, yeah.
Yeah, essentially they result in the same thing. Prescription is say a listing of companies or an industry that you do not want investments in. So, for example, tobacco, you might say, because we don't own it, it's a prescribed category now. Divestment is when you actually own the stock or are invested in an industry and then decide to sell it. And once you have done that, you have divested yourself. So essentially, whether you call it prescription or divestment, it's belief that you do not want to own that stock or buy that stock.
And just to give a little more context, there are examples of companies over the years that have been on the divestment list and have, because of the not in compliance with some policy that the church has, mostly around human rights and peacemaking, and have changed their behavior and have come off that list. So an example of that would be, I think, General Motors is one of those. We're in apartheid South Africa. That was part of our portfolio. And there was engagements that were deemed to be unfruitful, so they went on a divestment list for a period of time. They changed their behavior, and we were back invested with General Motors.
Okay, thank you for that. The second question that we have comes from Abby Mohawk, and she says, "Thanks so much for your stellar presentation and for all the good work that you do. Can you talk some about how you deal with the sense of urgency in climate change? So how do we do engagement, which takes a long time, even as it is effective, but also understanding that we need to respond quickly to climate change?"
Well, I think that you'll find that the committee, and not just us, but many other investors, have ramped up an extraordinary amount their commitment to time and energy and to finding creative strategies so that we don't get diverted necessarily into areas that are not going to be as productive over time. And that's certainly true of MRTI. The basic idea is to try to move forward at a not just a slow, not a slow pace, but a way of actually trying to get things going. And the criteria are going to really help us focus.
So I'm sorry, we have lost you a little bit. Can you speak up, please?
The idea, I don't know where it was. Let me go back. We're trying to focus in on what is going to be a ramped up collaborative effort by many different investors, public pension funds, religious investors, colleges, universities, and other institutions to not simply take actions which are then going to remove us from our collective effort to really try to move us toward a low carbon economy. And I know a number of companies and other investors have put in screens, but the screens have done nothing except keep them from investing in a few companies. There's no increased pressure on those companies, in large measure because they even keep secret the fact that they've divested of them. So our effort is going to be very public. It's going to call for the accountability by all companies, not simply fossil fuel. And when recommendations get made, they're going to be made with the strength of GA-approved criteria and a rigorous analysis of whether a company is committed to or moving toward fulfilling that criteria. We think that's the better way of spending our time and energy rather than the approach right now of trying to deal with all the ancillary areas that will come up with blanket divestment.
Okay. It doesn't look like we have any other questions right at this minute. There is a question about, can you say a little bit more about what MRTI's relationship to the group you mentioned, Ceres?
With Ceres?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Ceres, when Ceres got started way in the late 1980s, MRTI was, along with a number of other investors, were the kind of, I'd say, the the core supporters at that time. We were active from the very beginning in trying to recruit companies to endorse the principles, to become involved in reporting, and over the years have committed a lot of time and energy to building Ceres. When I first was involved with them, they had 5 employees full-time working out of an attic in a building on the Boston Commons. They were supported heavily by the visionary Joan Bavaria, who had launched what is now called Trillium Assets Management, pioneer in this area, and she heavily subsidized everything. Through the collective work, which for MRTI is involved, not simply the continued engagement with companies, but active presence at Ceres conferences, participating in the stakeholder teams that meet regularly with companies that have agreed to continuous environmental progress, and also leadership. I joined the board in 2001 of Ceres and have been a board member ever since, serving in various capacities. We've watched Ceres grow to where its annual budget is now close to $14 million, and have about 80 employees, and have been recognized globally to the extent that when the UN held its day of signing the Paris Agreement, our Executive Director, Mindy Luber, and our Chairperson, Ann Stossball, who's also the CEO of the California Public Employees Union, were asked to be one of, or 2 of the 16 speakers, I guess, or 15 speakers at that event. So we've been able to foster considerable leverage and growth of influence by active involvement in the with the Ceres Coalition.
And another way I would add to that is they have an extremely talented staff, and they're really just experts in all their areas, their respective areas. They really help us make our work a lot better by like as Bill says, guys coordinating with other kind of coalition members, being really just experts on all the issues, helping us when we file resolutions. They help make them stronger and help kind of advise us on how to craft those and how to influence other institutional investors. And it's just really a fantastic partnership.
Thank you. It looks like we have time for one more question. Laura Van Dale asks, has MRTI had any conversations about or with Monsanto? My understanding is that the PCUSA does have investments in Monsanto in spite of the fact that they engage in practices that are bad for people and the environment.
Yes, there have been a number of engagements with Monsanto over the years, and the stock has come in and gone out of the portfolio at different points along the way. We've consistently, when we've held the stock, voted our proxies with whatever initiatives are to, particularly around the area of lobbying, as well as the basically suing farmers that may, if they don't, they make the terminator seeds and all this type of stuff, and so if anybody collects their seeds, then they have real issues around the world. And most recently, there was, I think last year, a conference call with the company. Joseph Kennard of the Board of Pensions sat in on that as a representative to push them, but that was, I believe, on political lobbying that they've been doing as the focal point. So we've been as active, not as much as you could if it was a high priority, but been certainly involved in supporting shareholder engagement with them on a variety of issues over the years.
Well, one of the things I'll add about Monsanto and other kind of big agribusiness companies of their kind of ilk is, often people that are concerned about food justice issues and food integrity food security are surprised that Monsanto is available to be in our portfolios. And the biggest reason why they're in there is because there is currently no church policy that would screen them out. So there is no church policy that precludes investing in agribusiness companies that are participating in maybe some of the bad behavior that Monsanto, GMOs or other use of pesticides or different lobbying activities, that kind of things, those kinds of things. So that's kind of the shorthand answer about why they're in the portfolio. Because I mentioned early in the presentation, unless a company is on the proscription or divestment list, fund managers are free to do to invest with whatever company they think is going to produce a good financial return, and then the work of MRTI comes in to figure out what we own at various time and what makes the most sense given where the church is, where our partners are, where the other representatives are, on how to advance our broader kind of mission goals. And I think we're almost at the end of the time here, so I just want to show this last slide. If you would like to have a further conversation after this, Jessica mentioned that she's going to send out an email that'll have the documents I mentioned in them, as well as a link to this presentation. But also, please feel free to contact me, and my email address is right there if you want to engage in another conversation or if I can help in any other way. But we really appreciate this invitation, so thanks to Jessica and Jenny and the rest of the Hunger Program, and we hope it's been helpful.
And we thank you, Rob and Bill, so much for being with us today. And like we mentioned, we will be sending an email and follow-up that will have Rob's contact as well as the documents that he referenced. So thank you all so much for your time, and have a great day.
Great, thank you.